Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be section 5.1, our first section of notes for chapter 5, and we're going to look at some different factors that allow populations to be studied and also look at what things can go ahead and affect a population's growth or, in fact, sometimes a decrease in the population numbers. So first thing is remind ourselves what population is from last chapter. When we look at a population, we're looking at a group of organisms that are of the exact same species. So we might have a group of deer, we might have a group of squirrels, but either way, when we look at a population, it's those of the same species. Now, some different ways that we can study populations. So first thing is we have what's called a geographic range. So anything geography related is looking at the area in which that organism or population is living. So the space where it actually lives. So when we think about geography, we might think of different areas around the world. So we might go ahead and look at where do kangaroos live. Okay, that would be the geographic range. Second thing we can go ahead and study populations with is the growth rate. And the growth rate is just looking at how fast the population is growing. So at the end of the chapter, we're going to go ahead and look at some human population information, and we'll see that the human population, its growth rate dramatically increased at a certain point in time in history. So growth rate is just seeing kind of how fast the population is growing. Now we can also look at population density. Population density is just talking about the number of individuals in an area. So realistically, all we're thinking about is kind of how crowded is that area. Dense just means how many individuals in an area, how crowded or how spaced out is it. Then we can look at distribution. Distribution is how the individuals are spread out. Are they kind of all clumped together? Are they spaced out nice and even? Are they kind of randomly spread everywhere? So distribution is just looking at how those organisms of that population are kind of spread out in the area in which they live. And then lastly, we can go ahead and look at age structure. So age structure is looking at the number of males and females within each kind of age category. And age structure can tell us a lot about what might happen to a population. So if we look at a population, there's a lot of younger males and females around reproductive years. We might think that that population might grow in years to come because there might be more babies being born. If our population is more on the older end and we have fewer young individuals and more older individuals, okay, chances are less reproduction, less babies. There might be a slower increase or even a decrease in that population. So that's a little bit about what age structure can tell us. Now, if we look at population distribution a little bit further, again, population distribution is just how the individuals are spread out throughout their habitat where they're living. Okay, and it's going to be determined how the population interacts with each other. So do they hunt together like a pack of wolves? Okay, do they go ahead and do they have more competition in their hunting, or they might spread out more? It's going to really depend on how that population works together or maybe against each other. Okay, now there's three main ways a population can be distributed. Okay, first way is clumped, second is random, and third is uniform or even. So when we look at these three ways, clumped, just like it sounds, individuals are going to be clumped together. So the organisms are going to be clustered in groups. So when we look at kind of our diagrams below, okay, that is going to be the diagram all the way to the right. This is going to be clumped distribution. Okay, and a perfect example of that would be, again, kind of like a pack of wolves that hunt together. So you might have a pack here, a pack here, and a pack here within that geographic range where they are hunting. Then we can go ahead and look at random or unpredictable distribution. Again, random is random. It's just kind of they are where they are because of no reason. They just kind of got distributed and placed where they are based on no reason at all. Okay, so this middle one, that would be our random. And best example here would be flowers, okay, seeds. Okay, a lot of times it's just the wind that might take the seeds or the flowers that go ahead and kind of spread them out. That's why sometimes you randomly see some wildflowers on the side of the road where maybe there's no other flowers present. It's totally random. A lot of times it's the wind or other animals that maybe ate something and then distributed those seeds randomly when they went to the bathroom and excreted out those seeds. Okay, uniform, okay, obviously our last one left is going to be this first one. And that's where we have kind of some more even spacing between our individuals. Okay, perfect example of this would be penguins. If you ever watch the movie March of the Penguins, you'll notice that the male penguins, when they go ahead and incubate the eggs, okay, they actually are kind of very more uniform. They have like their little space, their little area that they stay in, and then the next penguin has their area as well. So everybody kind of has their own space, their own area, and it's kind of more evenly spaced out throughout the geographic range. Now, other factors that can affect population, obviously you guys know births and deaths. So births, individuals are being added, that can cause the population to increase. Deaths, okay, individuals are going to be removed from that population, so that will cause the population to decrease. So we have an increase and a decrease there. Now, other things that can happen in a population is we can have individuals immigrate into the area, which is also going to be an addition, an increase in the population number. Or we can have individuals emigrate. And when individuals emigrate, they are moving out of the population. They're leaving. So that's going to be a negative, okay? That's going to subtract from that population's number. So these are some different things that can cause a population to grow or to decrease over time. Now, when we look at a table like this, you can go ahead and kind of put together what might happen to that population based on those four factors. So if we have an original population of 500 and we have 200 births, that's going to go ahead and obviously put us at 700. Okay, so 500 plus 200 gives us 700. But then we have 100 deaths. So minus that 100, that's going to put us at 600. There's no immigration, there's no emigration, so our new population is 600. Okay. Now again, if we go ahead and look at the other examples, starting out with 500, okay, we are adding births, so we add 10, that gives us 510. Okay, we are minusing 100 with our deaths, so that's going to go ahead and put us down to 410. Then we have 100 being added because we have 100 immigrating in. So that's going to put us at 510. And then we have 10 that emigrate, 10 that leave. So minus 10 puts us at 500. Our final population is still 500 with what we actually started with, despite all of those different changes. Okay, go ahead and fill out those last two populations on your own and pay attention to whether you are adding or if you are subtracting based on the category of emigration, immigration, birth, or death. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is how populations can grow. There's two major categories. Okay, first one is exponential growth that we're going to look at. Exponential growth, just like it sounds, deals kind of like with math when we have an exponent. Okay, exponents cause numbers to grow very quickly. So exponential growth is where we see reproduction happening at a constant rate, and it causes our numbers to very, very, very quickly grow. Okay, so when we have exponential growth, we have reproduction happening constantly, and the larger a population gets, the more quickly it grows. It's a really, really rapid, fast growth in population. Okay, now when this occurs, so there's very strict conditions in which exponential growth can happen. Okay, first one we're going to go ahead and look at is when all food and space is available. So when there's plenty of food, plenty of space, that's what we call an ideal condition. Ideal conditions is like the perfect place to be in and to be living in. You have all the food, all the space you need. Other factors are protection from the predators and disease. There's no predators hunting you. There's no disease. There's no waste products. So you're not having any type of like feces or any poor living environments. All of these things are what produce kind of this ideal kind of perfect living condition that allows you to really focus on reproduction. Okay, a lot of times this happens if a species comes into a brand new habitat. So they might be brand new to the habitat and kind of have unlimited food and space and no predators yet. And it kind of produces this really ideal condition for them to really grow very quickly. Now, when we look at exponential growth on a graph, very important, the type of graph it creates is it's going to be a line graph with the shape of a J. Okay, it looks like kind of a stretched out J on the graph. All right. Now, what that means is we have slower growth, and then eventually it ends up rapidly increasing, and our population exponentially grows really quick. Okay. We ourselves are actually experiencing exponential growth right now, and we have been for quite some time. And again, we'll look at that even more when we get into the human population section. The second type of growth is called logistic growth. So the thing with exponential growth is it cannot happen forever. Exponential growth cannot happen forever. We aren't going to always have unlimited food, unlimited resources. We're never going to not have a predator. So organisms can't stay in exponential growth forever because eventually they're going to get so big that those resources are going to become limited, and we are going to start to see a decrease. So that's when we switch over to this logistic growth. So after exponential growth kind of hits its maximum rate, we go ahead and switch over to logistic growth. Okay, this is where a population's growth is going to kind of slow down or stop altogether. Okay, exponential growth can't happen forever. It won't be able to. So it kind of starts to slow down and stop, and that's when we move to this logistic type growth. Okay, when resources become limited. Now, another term we're going to talk about is carrying capacity. So when we look at a population and kind of the maximum amount that that environment can support, that's going to be what's called its carrying capacity. And when we're in logistic growth, we're going to approach that carrying capacity. And at that point, really, there's not anything more the environment can support as far as population growing and increasing. When we look at population growth on a logistic type of set on a graph, it's going to look a little bit different than what we see in exponential. It's going to be the shape of more of a stretched out S. So when we look at logistic growth, okay, you're going to see where you have this J part, and that's at exponential, okay, exponential part happening, but then once that growth starts to slow, that's where we see that J turn in more to an S, and it kind of stretches out a little bit more, okay? This area here, this purple line, this dotted purple line, where you start to see the growth actually go ahead and stabilize, that's the carrying capacity. Okay, that right there is the carrying capacity. That means that the environment that that population is living in cannot really support any more individuals above that line. So that's where you see that population growth stop altogether or really slow down and stabilize out. Now there's three phases as you saw on the graph. So the first phase of logistic growth is that exponential growth that we talked about first. Then once resources start to become limited, that growth is going to slow down, and eventually it's going to slow down enough to where it stops and stabilizes out, and that's when our population reaches that carrying capacity. Okay, once a population reaches carrying capacity, it may not always remain at that level based on if we add more resources or we have a decrease in resources or a disease comes in, we might see a population decrease or increase. And we might even see a new carrying capacity be set based on possible changes in the environment. Okay, so again, kind of just reviewing those three phases. So again, first we have that phase one, which is where we actually see that exponential growth occurring. We see that J-shaped curve happening. Then once resources start to become more limited, we go to phase two, where growth is going to start to go ahead and slow down a little bit. And then the third phase is where growth stops and it stabilizes. And that's where we reach that carrying capacity in our population for that environment. Okay. Otherwise, those are really the two ways we see populations grow. Again, exponential can't happen forever. Eventually, it's going to enter into that logistic part and go into phase two and eventually into phase three. Okay. Otherwise, go ahead and make sure you have all your notes down, ask any questions in class, and then we will move through some activities in the chapter.